segment number 4 of the series of LinkedIn Lives and podcasts I've been doing around Startups Are Ultramarathons, Lessons from the Trail. So if you've missed the first 3 segments, no worries. I'm basically doing these kind of in a modular format. But what I want to do is give you a quick preview of what we're going to be talking about. And that way you'll have some context if this is the first time you're tuning in or listening to these segments that I'm calling Lessons from the Trail. So I've been training for, and at the time now, it's July 1st that I'm recording this. I've now competed in the Western States 100, which is a ultramarathon, 100-mile ultramarathon, starting in Olympic Valley, California, finishing up in Auburn. I'm not going to talk about the race quite yet because I've been sharing these lessons from the trail based on some notes I've been compiling over the last couple of months, moving into and sort of pre-race. So I'm going to do a couple of different episodes post-race, so stay tuned for those. More of this coming along. So these are pre-race kind of lessons from the trail. And what I mean by lessons from the trail, when I think about running a startup, and I've been involved as a head of sales in 3 different B2B startups, tech startups. So I know what it's like to be in those shoes. And today at Sales Qualia, we've now coached hundreds of B2B tech startups over the years in their journey from startup to ramp up and through to scale up. So I know what it takes to go every single day. And I know every single day feels like a sprint, or every week feels like a sprint. You're sprinting on product, you're sprinting on hiring, you're sprinting on sales, you're sprinting to the next funding round, and you're constantly out of breath. What's important to remember is that journey to go from idea to impact really is an ultramarathon. It's a 10-year plus race that you're on, and you can't just keep sprinting. And I think it's important to keep some perspective. And so as I do these ultramarathons as part of my life, with lots of time on the trail doing training, I'm always thinking about, well, what's the context here? What are the lessons from the trail that I can bring into the life of startups, and particularly thinking about startups and startup selling. So in this episode, what we're going to do is talk about 2 more lessons, sort of 2 final pre-race lessons that I wanted to share. I was hoping to get to before I ran the race, but just ran out of time getting stuff done at work and getting ready and all those good things. So if you missed the first 3, like I said, a couple of the lessons that we covered, just to quickly recap, is number 1 is make hard things routine. Number 2 was prepare to train. Number 3 is communicate with your team and schedule everything. Number 4 is automate decisions. Number 5 is cover every detail. And number 6 was no wasted miles. And so those were 3 different episodes, 2 lessons per episode that we covered. So you can definitely go back and check those out, listen to those in the podcast, or find them on my LinkedIn profile and watch those videos. Because in each one of those 6 areas, I've talked about how the lessons from my training, my lessons from the racing that I do, specifically relates to what it's like to run and build and ramp up and scale up a startup. So we're going to continue with the 4th installment here, and then we'll go for about 20 minutes or so, 30 minutes or so. I've got 2 more lessons I want to share, and we'll take it from there. And then you can tune into the post-race LinkedIn Lives and podcasts that I've got coming. Already starting to think about those. I've actually got some notes written down, so you can expect some more installments around this theme that startups are ultramarathons, because they really are in so many ways. So let's dive in. So lesson number 7, or number 1 for today, number 7 in this series, what I wrote down is incrementalism. Incrementalism. I don't know if that's a real word or not. It's just a sort of a term that I've thought about when it comes to training. And so when you think about a race, an ultramarathon, oftentimes people that I speak with, they're like, "Oh my gosh, like how do you run 100 miles, or in some cases 200 miles?" I've done a couple 200-mile races. Like God, like how do you run 100 miles? And typically my answer to that is, well, so first of all, is I don't think about it as running 100 miles. I think about it as running 100 miles, meaning like 1 mile increments, or even in the race, it's station to station is one of the sort of mantras that people will talk about. Like every aid station is 5 or 6 or 7 miles away. In some of the races, sometimes they're a bit longer, but you don't think about the magnitude of the whole race. You just think about station to station. And when it comes to training and sort of ramping up and getting ready for these races, I remember thinking about the Western States 100, 10 years ago, before I even started doing ultramarathons. I was doing longer distance endurance races. I was doing Ironman triathlons and some other things. And the whole concept of running 100 miles seemed completely impossible to me. Like I didn't think my body could handle running that far. It was hard enough just training for Ironman triathlons and getting my body, ready for those. And in an Ironman triathlon, you're running a full marathon after swimming 2.6 miles and after biking 112. Like that marathon feels, forever. And just training for that and trying to run 30 or 40 miles a week in training felt really hard. It was hard on my body. I just couldn't handle more than 30, 40 miles a week. So the idea of like running a 100-mile race in 24 or 30 hours just seemed completely impossible. And further, when I think about the Western States 100, I mean, I know this trail really well. I've run parts of it. I've run almost all of it over the course of the last couple of years. And even as recently as last fall, I attempted an FKT, which is called a fastest known time. So with the pandemic and all the races shut down, I was looking for something something of magnitude to do. And it turns out that to my knowledge, nobody had ever completed a 200-mile trek from Olympic Valley down to Auburn, which is the Western States 100 course, and then turning around and going back, which would be a 200-mile trek. And so there was one other person that had tried it, and he wasn't able to complete it. And I read his press release, and I'm like, wow, that's really interesting. Nobody's actually done this, so maybe I could do it. Why not? And I've talked about this in previous podcasts as well, this FKT attempt. And even in training for that FKT and even doing that FKT, I remember leaving Olympic Valley at 5:30 in the morning and running all the way down to mile 70, almost 78 of the Western States course. And there's parts of that course, I remember like some of the climbs coming out of this place called Devil's Thumb, which is appropriately named. It's a 1.5-mile climb where you're climbing like 1,500, almost 2,000 feet out of this canyon up to a peak. And a second climb is up to a place called Michigan Bluff. And again, it's just a 2,000-foot climb over about 2.5 miles. It's just these long, enduring climbs that just take forever. And I remember in that FKT thinking to myself, like, my gosh, like how could anybody do these climbs as part of a 100-mile race? And how could they do that fast enough that they could get done in 24 hours? It just felt impossible to me. And so this comes into the sort of the lesson from the trail, which is, if you think about the size and the scope and the magnitude of what you want to do with your startup, it is, it's almost impossible in some ways to think about realizing that vision, that 10-year vision that you have for your company, wherever you are in that journey, whether you're just starting out, maybe you're a couple of years in, you're already doing a couple $1 million in revenue. You're just scratching the surface of that total addressable market, and that the future impact that you want to make for your market and for your customers is going to be 100x or 1,000x that, right? It just, in some days, the vision is important for you as a founder, but it can also still feel intimidating. It can feel overwhelming. And what's important is when you're thinking about these races and thinking about your startup, is like that's the concept of incrementalism. Like, how do we do small things every day that builds the foundation, that puts us on the path, that keeps us on the path, that moves us to the next step, gets us like that much closer to the final destination. And so just in the last 6 months, as I've been training for this race, there's a couple of things that my coach had me do to help prepare. So, hi, my wife just came home. I'm doing a LinkedIn Live.
Oh.
So one of the things he had me do is this idea of doing some hill runs and specifically doing repeats. So I've talked about these repeats that I've done on Wednesday morning. And so like starting in January, almost every Wednesday, I go out to this one place and do these hill repeats. And I time myself on these repeats. Like, what's the lap time? How long does it take me to get to the top? How long does it take me to get back down to the bottom? And then doing that repeat. And, you can track your time on Strava. And I remember, early in the year, it was everything I had to get from the bottom to the top of this one climb in like under 20 minutes. I mean, I remember I'm looking at my times right now. It was like, 19 minutes and 44 seconds. And I remember getting to the tower at the top of this climb thinking like, yeah, I made it in under 20 minutes. And then incrementally every week, every month, is I was going out there and doing repeats, 3 of those in a day, and sometimes in one case 5 in a day. My times on those repeats slowly came down and slowly came down. And I remember the first time I broke 17 minutes, and it felt like, wow, this is a huge achievement. I went from nearly 20 minutes down to 17 minutes. Think about that. It's a 15% improvement on your time. And then finally, in my last preparation, the last couple of weeks leading up to the race, the last time I was out there, I was able to do that one repeat in 15:30 from gate to tower, like powering up this hill. So, almost a 25% improvement. But that 25% improvement didn't happen in January. It happened from January all the way through into May, because I was going out there being consistent and incrementally improving my time. So just going from under 20 to under 19 to under 18, under 17, 16, and then finally getting that time of 15:30, right? And so I think it's really important when you think about all the different aspects where you can apply this concept of incrementalism to your startup. I mean, it could be something as simple as like increasing your prices. Like, chances are you're probably underpricing for the value that your customers are getting. If you have customers right now and they're happy and they're delighted and they can't believe that they're getting so much value out of you, there's probably a signal that you should be increasing prices. And it can feel intimidating to increase the prices. So that's an opportunity for you to just incrementally increase prices for the next sale that you have. Increase prices 10%. Chances are your customers, your prospects won't even know the difference. The only person that knows the difference that you've increased prices 10% is you. If you're charging $3,000 a month to your current customers, and for the next prospect, you tell them it's $3,500 a month, it's more than a slight increase from the $3,000, or even $4,000 a month, increase from 3 to 4. The chances are, like, the difference in the decision between $3,000 and $4,000 a month is probably pretty small, right? If you're charging $100,000 a year to use your platform, what if you charge $125,000? Would your customers really notice the difference? Would your prospects really notice the difference? Is the decision that much different for them to spend $125,000 versus $100,000 with you? I mean, you could add an implementation fee as an example. That's a way to increase your prices incrementally. Some other ways to think about incrementalism and how it applies to startups is, like, how do you, like, a lot of startups know, like, maybe you've gotten a lot of customers from inbound, or you've gotten a lot of references, and you want to start an outbound sequence. Like, outbound and reaching the market more aggressively is one of the ways you're going to go out and find new customers, but it feels intimidating. It feels overwhelming to have a completely built out 20-touch outbound sequence using a platform like Outreach or SalesLoft. And it's just like the concept of going from zero outbound to all of the things that you see other companies doing can feel overwhelming. So the concept of incrementalism is like, well, look, what if you just took 100 contacts out of your database and you ran a 5-touch sequence with them? That's a first version of outbound. And that 5-touch sequence could be 3 emails, a LinkedIn message, and a phone call. Like, you can do that with 100 contacts. Do 20 a day, every day for a week. And you started off those sequences. And now every day you're just contacting the next 20 with touch number 2. So these are easy ways that you can incrementally get from what might seem like big and overwhelming, but just starting really small and making small progress. Another example might be moving up market. Maybe you're selling to the SMB segment, or you're selling to the mid-market segment, and you're selling, 20, 30K deals, and you feel like you want to make the jump to 100K deals, or you want to make the jump to selling to Fortune 500s. Well, maybe instead of jumping right to the Fortune 500s, what if you found smaller competitors? So let's say you want to sell to, companies like Home Depot. Maybe that's a target customer for you. Well, that's one of the biggest companies in the United States, one of the biggest companies in the world, right? Well, what if instead of like trying to jump straight up to selling to a company like Home Depot, what if you found some regional companies like Orchard Supply Hardware, OSH, which is a company, there's locations out here on the West Coast, or 84 Lumber, which is out on the East Coast, or Menards, which is I think it's in the Midwest. Bigger chains, have 20, 30, 50, 100 locations. Is not Home Depot, but it's a chance for you to move up market and sell to some of the bigger companies that have bigger marketing or bigger budgets. First of all, bigger spending capacity, and most of all, give you an opportunity to incrementally move up market and almost practice for when you want to sell to the big guys. The same thing with hiring, right? People like, I want to hire a whole sales team. I want to hire SDRs. I want to have, a couple of full-time SDRs. That can feel big and feel intimidating. It can be expensive. But what if in incrementalism from that standpoint, what if you just hired 2 part-time SDRs. Hire a stay-at-home, a couple of part-time stay-at-home moms or dads that want to work, but they don't want to go back full-time because they're still adjusting. Or maybe, looking for returning military people, or looking for students coming out of college, working with a recruiter just to find a couple of part-time people just to get that hiring muscle working, to get that outbound engine working. So you don't have to take that huge leap to hire 3 SDRs and build and implement a huge outbound program all from zero. So these are just examples of how you could take this concept of incrementalism. All that stuff is not going to happen overnight. You didn't build your product in one day, right? You didn't build your company in one day. You didn't get to, if you're at $1 million in revenue at this point, you didn't get there, in a year. Chances are, from the time you started your company to get to $1 million in revenue, probably took you a couple of years. All of that was incremental. Every product feature, every product improvement, every integration is just an incremental improvement on the product. And now you have a product that's saleable, that you're selling for 30, 40, 50K a year, that you could sell for $100,000 or $200,000 a year. All that happened incrementally. And so when I think about lessons from the trail, I think it's so important to remember, we've got these big goals and these big outcomes and the big vision that you want to get to. For me, it was, finishing the Western States 100 and doing all the training and the hard work. But the concept of finishing that race in a time that I wanted to hit back on January 4th, when I started training for this race, or even back in the fall, when I was first thinking about what it was going to take to get ready for this race, it was too overwhelming. So heads down every month, every week, do incremental improvements, incremental progress towards that goal. And if you continue to do that in a consistent way, that's what builds the foundation that allows you to make those big outcomes feel much more realistic, much more possible to you, taking the impossible, making it possible through incrementalism. Okay, that's lesson number 7 and the first one for today. By the way, just real quick before I get into the second one and the lesson number 8 today, if you are a startup CEO, a founder, and you're in the B2B space, and maybe you've gotten to a certain part of your growth, and you're trying to figure out, what does the next stage look like? What are some of the systems that you need to build? And it feels intimidating to what's it going to take to build an outbound strategy? Or maybe it feels like you want to start running some live events and webinars and workshops to reach your market, and that just feels a little too big or overwhelming. Or maybe you need to do some hiring, but you're not sure how to do it. That just feels too big and too overwhelming. A lot of times that's a reason people work with coaches. People like me are designed, our job is to help you figure out what are those small steps, what are those easy wins, those easy steps you can take every way that's going to get you to those bigger outcomes. So if you think you might want some help with this, or you just want to jam on a couple of ideas, get a good sense for where you are and where you need to go, what is your situation right now, then just shoot me an email, Scott@salesqualia, QUALIA.com, Scott@salesqualia, QUALIA.com. If you're watching this on LinkedIn, you can just DM me here on LinkedIn. If you're listening to the podcast, just shoot me an email. Type the word private into the subject line. That'll just let me know you have a quick chat with me or somebody on my team. And we'll help you figure out what systems and help you break down what seems like too big or too hard into small, digestible chunks, little projects that you can execute on every 2, 3, 4 weeks. That's going to get you to where you want to go. Okay. Okay. So second and lesson number 8 on lessons from the trail. Probably my favorite one, and probably one of the most difficult ones to stick to, which is the journey is the joy. The journey is the joy. Look, first of all, let's face it. I am unbelievably fortunate that I have a life. I've been born into the life that I was born into, and I'm in this situation where the hard thing that I want to do is train for a 100-mile race. We've been through pandemic. We've been through recession, in years past. There's people that are globally, billions of people struggling. The life that I have is truly amazing. And compared for, even if most people listening to this podcast, relative to the rest of the world, let's face it, running a startup, I know it's important to you, and it's important to your family, and it's important for you to hit those outcomes, and you're under a lot of pressure. It's also important to remember, relative to what other people have to do every single day on multiple continents across the world, what we get to do in choosing our path, choosing to run this company, choosing to do what we do every day is pretty remarkable. And I think if you just think about that from a gratitude standpoint and remember, like, we get to choose to do this. That helps you with this idea that the journey is the joy. And when I think about that from a lessons from the trail, like, I've talked about, in some of these past episodes, these past installments, like, sometimes it just sucks when you got to get up and train. It sucks to get up at 3:45 in the morning on a Saturday, knowing like this is the day I actually want to sleep in and get some rest. But instead I've got to get up at 3:45 because I want to get out of the house at 4:15 so I can hit the trail by 6 and be home by noon or 2 o'clock. Right. But there's also a certain part of that when that alarm goes off at 3:45. Like I remember, I think about this, like I choose this. I get to do this. I get to the opportunity. I have a life that allows me to do this. I have a spouse, my wife, who's unbelievably supportive. I have a son who's happy and healthy, who gets to play with his friends on the weekends now, which he couldn't do a year ago. And he's happy on Saturdays, just playing with his friend down the street. And it's easy for me to just leave the house on a Saturday morning at 4:15 in the morning and be gone for 8 hours and run on a trail. And so I get to do that. Like there's a certain joy in that moment when I might feel like, do I really want to get up? And I see 3:45 and I just remember like, I get to do this. This is amazing that I get to do this. And taking pride in those actions, taking pride in doing the hard workouts, taking pride in Sunday morning when I go out and do deadlifts and pull-ups and, the heavy lifting workouts that I do. My coach tells me are completely optional, but to me, I tell myself, no, he says they're optional, but to me, they're required. Like there's a certain joy in being able to choose that and how I feel when I'm doing these hard things. There's pride in that sort of personal responsibility that I place on myself to go out there and do these kinds of things. And, of course, when you're out there on the trail and it's a nice downhill stretch and it's easy running and you kind of zone out and you feel like you're kind of floating a little bit, those are the times where it's like, wow, trail running is magical. It feels like you're in a completely different dimension. And then there are times in training where you're climbing up places like Devil's Thumb and it's 90 degrees out and you're feeling the heat and you're feeling tired and you tell yourself like, man, here I am 20 miles into a run and I still got, another 15 to go. But then I tell myself like, I choose this. This is all training. This is all opportunity to get better. And so just remembering like every day when you get to when I get to do this trail running, when I get to do this training, I just try to always keep that in perspective. Like I choose to do this and I'm in an unbelievable situation that I get to do it. And even when I'm doing the hard stuff in training, that journey is the joy because I don't know if I'm going to be successful or not in the race. The struggle is guaranteed, but success is not. The training is required. You have to do the training in order to be prepared for the race. But just because you did the training doesn't mean you're going to be successful in the race. Any one of 10 or 20 things could go wrong. You could have a bad day with nutrition and your stomach's just not keeping food down. You could twist an ankle like that simply on the one of seemingly millions of rocks on the trail or roots, easy to trip, easy to turn an ankle, and that could end your day. Right? It could be hot and you end up getting dehydrated. You could have too little salt or too much salt in your system and your body can shut down. So, there's all kinds of things that could happen. There could be a wildfire that could completely end the race. They've canceled the Western States 100 in past years because of wildfires. Last year, they canceled it because of COVID. Like we can't guarantee that the race is even going to go on. And if it does go, I can't guarantee I'm going to get to the finish line. Any one of 100 things could happen and go wrong that could prevent me from getting there. And so it's important to remember like this training that I'm doing is the journey and the journey is the joy. It's knowing that I've done everything possible to put myself in position to complete this race and hopefully complete that race in under 24 hours. I've done everything I can. And there's pride in that and there's joy in that because I know when I do get to that starting line and the gun goes off, regardless of what happens, I've done everything possible. And there's a certain sense of contentment and joy, knowing that through those last 6 months that I've been training, that journey has been a joyful occasion. It should feel like, regardless of what happens, I should feel proud of the fact that I put in my best effort, and it should feel that same way with you. So, the journey is the joy for you and your startup, and especially with sales, is like, look, maybe you don't like prospecting. Maybe you don't feel like, I don't like sending cold emails out. I don't like pinging people on LinkedIn. I don't like doing cold calls, but that's okay. Like, that's part of the journey. And every time you're doing those things you don't like, remember, you're getting better at something that you don't like. You're going to learn something that's going to be important for you, whether it's today or this week or in the next 3 months when you have to hire your first SDR. Like, that journey is the joy. Take joy in the fact, even if you don't like doing it, take joy in the fact that you are learning something. Maybe you get nervous before sales calls, and that's okay. I tell people this all the time. When I'm talking to somebody about our program, I always feel a little bit nervous because I'm excited and I want to make sure I'm going to do well. I want to represent the company well. I want to represent what we do well. I want to help this person. I want, from an ego standpoint, of course, you want to hear people say yes and not say not right now or not a good fit or something else, right? So when you're feeling nervous before sales calls, embrace that, because it means when you're nervous, it means you care. Like, that's part of the joy. That's part of the emotional roller coaster that people talk about, because without that emotional roller coaster, like, is it really worth doing? Having those highs, having those lows, when things get hard, that's the most important time to take a moment and say, wow, things are hard. This is great. My wife once told me, when I was really struggling with the business a couple of years ago, I had this little stretch of a month or 2, 3, I can't remember how long it was. I was just like, God, everything feels like a grind. I was so frustrated all the time. And I was just talking to her about it one night, and she said, look, you have hard problems because the only problems you have left are the hard ones. You've solved all the easy ones. And that really helped things put in perspective for me. And I was like, wow, that's a great way to think about it. So the hard problems are ones to embrace, because that means you've solved a bunch of easy ones. That's another way to kind of keep things in context. The journey is the joy. If you screw up, like, people are going to screw up. And yeah, it's okay to be mad at yourself for a couple minutes. It's okay to feel like, I blew that opportunity. But there's a saying in ultramarathons, which is, don't let a DNF, did not finish. It means if you don't finish a race, you DNF. Don't let a DNF become a DNL, meaning you did not learn. Right? So just because you DNF'd a race doesn't mean you failed. It just means you didn't hit the finish line. So don't let that DNF become a DNL. And it's the same for you. If you screw up a sales call, if you screw up a presentation, if you screw up an interaction with a client or a customer, that's okay. It's going to happen. Learn from it. And then be happy that you had that opportunity to learn. Be genuinely happy when you have a new client, when you bring on those new customers. Like, look that person in the eye and say thank you, because those are the engine. That's the revenue that's going to help you grow. Like, just remember, you get to do this every day. You're in a position where you get to listen to this podcast or watch this thing live on LinkedIn. You're not doing one of the terrible things that billions of people in the world have to do just to stay alive every day, without access to clean water, or having to worry about bombs, or having to worry about social and political insurrections, or having to worry about personal safety each and every day. We choose this. We get to do this. So just remember that, however hard it is, it's okay. It's supposed to be hard. If it was easy, everybody would do it. So the journey is the joy. And that's my 8th kind of pre-race lesson from the trail. So that's it. We're right at coming up to half an hour, which is a good place to stop, I think. Hopefully not too long, and not too short for you. So just to recap, incrementalism, make small steps, small improvements every single day. Yes, keep the vision in mind, but then just remember, you're not going to get that 10-year vision. You're not going to make that 10-year impact today. It's going to take a series of hard work and small steps in order to get there. So incrementally improve, track your progress, make small steps, and you're going to get there slowly and surely. And then secondly is the journey is the joy. And that's, could be the most important thing, because if you just remember that, to act with gratitude, and remember that you get to do this every single day, that will help you keep things in perspective when things get hard. So, all right, I think that's it. If you think you want some help, like I said, if you just want to brainstorm ideas, you want me to take a quick look at your situation, offer a couple suggestions, have me or somebody on my team hop on the horn with you. Happy to do it. Just shoot me an email, scott@salesqualia.com. Write the word private in the subject line. Or you can shoot me a DM here on LinkedIn if you're watching this on LinkedIn. And coming soon, very soon, is the post-race lessons from the trail, because the race is past and I have many lessons. And I can tell you the journey was the joy 100% of the way. So All right. Thanks so much for watching. That's so much for listening. This is Scott Sangucci signing off.